Hi friends, so I wanted to share something by Mana Muhawesh from Mint Press News. She's founder and editor of Mint Press News, and I wanted to share something I saw of hers on Facebook. It was about her position on war, and she said, "I'm unapologetically anti-war. I don't care if a Democrat is in office or if a Republican is in office. I will oppose war no matter who is in charge. You can call me whatever name you like and label me whatever you want to make yourself feel better about your choice to support the murder of innocent people. Don't mistake my opposition to military intervention as support for another country's leader. It's just that there is no such thing as a humanitarian war. When military is sent in, or when bombs are dropped, history has shown us over and over again that it's the civilians that suffer the consequences. It's the schools, hospitals, water treatment facilities, electrical grids, agriculture fields and homes that are targeted. Children are orphaned, women are widowed, and are put in danger of rape and kidnapping. War results in creating failed states, civil wars, sectarianism, and creating a humanitarian crisis far exceeding how the country started off. War is only good for the 1%, the rich billionaires, the oil companies, Wall Street, and the rest of the corrupt banksters, the weapons manufacturers, the think tanks, the major construction corporations, agriculture giants, major food companies, etc. War is not good for we the people. It only divides us. It's that simple." And then she wrote something about Ilhan Omar, who said something about a two-state solution, Representative Ilhan Omar in the US Congress, which is sort of a strange position for someone who I think, no, she's not Palestinian, but anyway, it's Rashid Tlaib, I think, that's Palestinian. But anyway, so Mana Muhawesh said something about Ilhan Omar's position about Palestinians. "I stand with Ilhan Omar and admire her courage for bringing attention to the influence of big money on politics, including the Israel lobby. However, let's not mince words here and be clear that her stance behind a, quote, two-state solution, end quote, in her recent op-ed in the Washington Post for the Israel-Palestine conflict is one that supports Israeli apartheid, land theft, and ethnic cleansing, which stand at a crossroad to even her strongest stances against oppression. I'm actually extremely baffled that she has taken this stance. A one-state solution is the only solution to inclusion, peace, justice, and equality, where Jews, Muslims, and Christians can live together under the same law and representation. And it's disappointing that Rashida Tlaib, a Palestinian-American politician, applauded Ilhan's stance. A two-state solution goes against progressive values. For the past several decades, the two-state solution has played a huge role in the colonial playing cards to steal more land while manipulating the public with the theatrics of supporting an Israeli state and a Palestinian state. While so-called peace talks were taking place, Israel was busy annexing, occupying, stealing water, murdering, and enacting apartheid policies that treated Muslims and Christian Arabs as second-class citizens, while giving American and European Jews superiority in the laws. Supporting a two-state solution would enable Israel's theft of Palestinian land, water, and resources, and further support an ethno-state of white extremist colonizers. A two-state solution would in fact only enable hate among two neighbors that may go further to war with each other. The list goes on. Let's be clear, a one-state solution where all people are equal, what a thought, is the only solution for peace. We must support equality and love between Jewish, Muslims, and Christians because that's how these religious groups lived with each other before the colonialist state of Israel was created in Palestine. Please join me in creating dialogue with Ilhan to support this position." So that's two posts from Mana Muhawesh. I think she's great. I like the way she thinks. And I think this is the most progressive view that we all should have if we call ourselves progressive. I don't like using that word because I think that's a word that is bandied about, and there's Alia in the background. She likes getting in the videos. She's wearing a little bird be safe collar. It gets the attention of birds, so no, we don't like to dress our cats up. So anyway, there's something that I wanted to talk about, really. I wanted to show you an excerpt from Stephen Kinzer. Stephen Kinzer wrote a piece for the Boston Globe. Now, the Boston Globe, I think, must be fairly progressive, if I can use that word, to publish a piece like this. And by the way, Stephen Kinzer wrote that book, Overthrow, about all the different coups d'etats that the US empire has engaged in. So check that out if you can. But anyway, I think that's Stephen Kinzer, yeah. Anyway, so he wrote this piece for the Boston Globe, and it's a really good piece about Russiagate. I want to just share with you some excerpts of it because I think it really clearly illustrates the issues. Here's an excerpt that he posted on his own Facebook page of his essay, opinion piece. The election of President Donald Trump was not, we now learn, the result of a conspiracy directed from Moscow. This finding by Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller will change few minds. A recent Gallup poll found that more than half of Americans now consider Russia a, quote, critical threat, end quote. How could they not? Lurid demonization of Russia has become a staple of American politics. We have found a potent remedy for the, quote, enemy deprivation syndrome, end quote, to which we fell victim after the end of the Cold War a generation ago. Our search for a malignant force on which we can blame the world's troubles has ended in triumph. Once again, as in the 1950s, everything is Russia's fault, no matter what Mueller says. Russiagate was a vivid example of the power of narrative. The storyline was classic, embodied in countless Western movies, and I think this is a really good bit here. A brute tries to crush an innocent victim who only wants to live in peace. And that's so true. I mean, that's what the US empire always tries to make out, as if it's going around making peace and that all it wants is peace, etc., when it's actually in the center of everything, center of violence everywhere, pretty much everywhere almost. For 2 weeks, influential newspapers and television networks devoted themselves to unbroken coverage of each daily, quote, revelation, end quote, or, quote, bombshell, end quote, reported breathlessly as, quote, breaking news, end quote. A chorus of commentators, many of them former generals or intelligence officers, certified the narrative as not only true, but proof that a hateful power is plotting relentlessly to destroy our way of life. Mueller's report makes clear that much of this hyperventilating was either highly overblown or downright false. Russians were evidently involved in purloining emails and posting memes on Facebook, but their mass-scale attack on American democracy turns out not to have happened. Although the collusion story has been a white-hot Washington obsession, Americans outside the Beltway cared about it. On the weekend after Mueller's report was issued last month, 2 presidential candidates, Senator Elizabeth Warren and Representative Tulsi Gabbard, were campaigning in New Hampshire. After they finished their tours, journalists asked them what questions they heard most often at public meetings. Both reported that voters seemed focused on income equality, climate change, and the opioid epidemic, and that they had not heard a single mention of Russiagate. Why, then, did the collusion story, the charge that the Kremlin worked with Trump to rig the 2016 election, drive the political class into such a frenzy? Partly because it provided an urgently needed explanation for how Trump could have defeated Hillary Clinton. Democrats, liberal cable TV news networks, and other Trump haters have trouble admitting that many voters still considered Clinton uniquely repugnant, and that Trump tapped into widespread disgust at the incestuous elite she represents. The narrative of the Russian intervention offered a more comforting explanation. Trump's victory was determined not at the polls, but in Moscow. As long as Clinton and those who followed her off the electoral cliff believe this, they can avoid self-criticism and blame someone else for her loss. Best of all, years of relentless attacks by American pundits and politicians have turned the person they want to blame, President Vladimir Putin of Russia, into a caricature of evil. That made it possible to imagine Putin as powerful enough to decide the outcome of a presidential election in the United States. Mueller's report is a rude shock to those who dove down this rabbit hole. Media-driven hallucinations have shaped American political history. Spain's 1898 destruction of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor propelled the United States into the Spanish-American War. But 70 years later, the explosion was found to have been caused by sparks from the ship's furnace. Congress voted to plunge into war in Vietnam after communists attacked U.S. warships in the Gulf of Tonkin. Later, it became clear that no such attack occurred. As we prepared to invade Iraq in 2003, almost every important politician and media outlet parroted baseless assertions that Iraq had stockpiled weapons of mass destruction. In each of these cases, the reports seemed to make sense because they confirmed what our leaders told us was true. They allowed us to believe we could turn fantasy into reality. Children love to imagine doing that. Adults should know better. Mueller's report forces us to accept the cruel fact that voters, not Vladimir Putin, chose our current president. Americans who never swallowed the collusion narrative are unsurprised. Yet a core of diehards will hold on to that narrative like a hound that cannot let go of a meaty bone. Just because Mueller could not find proof of a conspiracy that would hold up in court, they argue, doesn't mean that no conspiracy existed. In their hearts, they still think Putin did it. This form of denial might be benign if it simply added a new layer of pathos to our already bizarre political circus. Unfortunately, it has global implications. The delusion that Russians hate us and are working assiduously to rob us of our democratic birthright is dangerous. It leads to the belief that they are our irredeemable enemy, and that therefore we should not negotiate with Russia about reducing tension in Europe, limiting nuclear weapons, calming the Middle East, or anything else. As this becomes dogma, anyone in Washington who argues diplomacy with Russia is stigmatized. That is more dangerous to our security than anything that happened during the last presidential campaign. So Stephen Kinzer is a senior fellow at the Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs at Brown University. So you can find the rest of that article at in the bostonglobe.com. Find it at bostonglobe.com. It's an opinion piece. So anyway, that's really all I wanted to share, except for this last bit from the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, Nils Melzer. And this is about Julian Assange, and as you probably heard, Julian Assange is dangerously close to being expelled from the Ecuadorian embassy, more so than he was before. This is some sort of a leak from someone. I think it was from the Ecuadorian embassy or somebody who had insider knowledge and said that they were going to take him out of there and arrest him. And then you know what would happen after that. He'd be extradited to the US. They'd have a kangaroo court, throw him in prison, torture him, possibly even execute him. They've been talking about that over the years. And they just throw away the key. So that is a really, really frightening thing. And I just hate the way this is going on and on. That poor man in that Ecuadorian embassy. And people have been, sort of camping outside the Ecuadorian embassy and keeping an eye on it. I don't know how this is going to end. I really don't. I don't know how it's going to end. It's just awful. The UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, Nils Melzer, says he is concerned by reports that Julian Assange could be expelled from the Ecuadorian embassy in London, saying he's received information that the WikiLeaks founder, quote, is at risk of extreme vulnerability and his health is in serious decline, end quote. WikiLeaks warned on Thursday that it had received a tip-off from a high-level Ecuadorian source warning that Assange would be thrown out of the embassy where he has sought asylum since 2012 in the coming hours or days. Melzer is calling on Ecuadorian authorities not to withdraw their political asylum protection of Assange and to continue providing him with, quote, adequate living conditions and access to appropriate medical care, end quote. The UN official also says he is preparing a formal request to both Ecuador and the UK to personally visit Assange and meet with authorities from both governments over his situation. Now, the US really only pays attention to anybody anybody from the UN when it suits them, and the UN has no muscle. You know, it does not have any way of actually enforcing anything. That's why Israel continues to illegally settle, despite many resolutions by the UN. That's why you know, things continue on, even though the UN might speak out about certain things and criticize the US. It doesn't make any difference. The US is a rogue state at this point and has been for a while, but the US empire is a rogue empire, and I don't know how that is going to end either. That's another thing. I don't know how the US can go on the way it has been going on, and you know how far it thinks it can go. What I can see is that there's a lot of alliances being made through Russia and China. There's a lot of countries, including possibly even Turkey, is starting to move away from the US, and Turkey is a part of NATO and has a significant military presence in NATO, and so if Turkey leaves NATO, that is going to make the US far less powerful in some ways, because it relies on NATO and it relies to some degree on Turkey. So, you know, anyway, I don't know what's going to happen. Global domination is the US empire's aim, and that's what they're doing, and they're still on with it. Venezuela, still trying to overthrow Venezuela by any means necessary, and that is failing, and the only thing left for them, I think, is a military invasion, and I think they're afraid of Russia. If Russia wasn't around, they would have already militarily invaded, because Venezuelan citizens are not going to have this imperialist coup d'etat. They're not, and Guaido it's just not working. He's useless, really. He's worse than useless. So anyway, and one last thing I wanted to say. Sorry, this has been a little fragmented. I've been caught up. I'll just tell you quickly. I've been the last, not yesterday, but for about 3 days, I spent with this campaign that I've been doing since July last year, which is to lobbying politicians to improve trans and gender diverse rights in Tasmania. And for the last 3 days in particular, we were on the floor in the gallery of the Legislative Council, who was debating the bill that passed the lower house. That's the bill that my partner in particular, had written most of that legislation, and it has been amended to some degree by different ones, amendments to the amendments and so forth. So there are a bunch of us involved. Dee Dee just happens to be a good legislation writer, because she used to do that in the Australian Parliament for a few years in Canberra. And so anyway, this is what's been going through. It passed the lower house in the Tasmanian Parliament, and then it's actually passed the upper house, the Legislative Council, despite the government's continual obfuscation and misinformation and just dragging it out and trying to completely foil the whole thing. That's the Liberal government who is in office at the present time in Tasmania, a right-wing government who doesn't care at all about human rights, really. They care about corporations, a typical neoliberal, neoconservative government, really. So anyway, that's what I was doing for 3 days, and it was literally one day spent 12 hours mostly sitting in the gallery, non-stop, watching this debate and watching some of the Liberal government legislators. There was a few of them just sort of obfuscating and trying to stymie the whole thing. So that was very difficult. So 3 days of that, and hence that's why I haven't been posting any videos, because I was completely taken up with that. And it's actually an hour and a quarter away. We have to drive to get in there and come back. So it completely took up most of the 3 days. So anyway, that's what I've been doing, and next week, from Tuesday to Thursday, I'll be in Parliament House in the lower house again, because it goes back down from the Legislative Council back down to the lower house, and I'll be in the gallery there watching that. It should pass, this legislation, which will make it up there with the best in the world for trans and gender diverse people, and so I'm looking forward to that, but also it's very anxiety provoking because the government has been, the Liberal government who's in office now has been so difficult and so awful, really. But that's what I'll be doing next week. So if I vanish for a few days, that's why. Anyway, so I'm very tired, to be honest, after those 3 days. It's very anxiety provoking. It's also awful to, like, I'm an ally of trans and gender diverse people, and it's awful watching the sort of the disgusting comments that are made sometimes, and the absolutely clueless and ignorant comments that are made, and also seeing how the Murdoch press here does their best to support anything that these right-wing governments say and want. So, you know, you get lots of transphobic and homophobic trolls and all sorts of things. And unfortunately, a lot of what is happening in this, the pushback from this legislation has been funded by the Catholic diocese in Hobart. They've been funding sort of the ads, these transphobic ads, putting out misinformation and disinformation and sort of hateful stuff. So that's what, you know, transphobic Catholics, I mean, there are lots of wonderful Catholics, but some of these Catholics in this archdiocese in Hobart are awful because they're trying to deny trans people equal rights and to have a decent life without having to be exposed as whatever and having to deal with awful violence and stuff like that. So anyway, it's just really sad that this is how some Catholic groups spend their money, when really what they should be doing is addressing the pedophilia problem in their clergy. That's what they should be focusing on, but instead they start these stupid groups like Tasmanian Coalition for Kids, which is really just run by the Archdiocese of Hobart by transphobic Catholics. And they put out all sorts of garbage about trans people and gender diverse people. And I think that's incredibly sad. But anyway, at some point soon, probably after the next, we haven't gotten around to it. I was going to get Dee Dee to talk about the recent thing that happened in the Legislative Council, but we haven't had time. And so after Thursday next week, she will probably be available to talk about that. So anyway, thank you very much for watching, and please click the like button if you like the content. Please hit the subscribe button, click the notifications bell if you want to receive updates, and I always welcome comments. So thank you so much for watching. My name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Fate Sequence from Vega. Till next time, bye for now.